Okay, in this lesson we're going to cover information about four-sided figures, which are quadrilaterals. So I kind of went ahead and filled in some of the information here. Quadrilaterals are four-sided figures that are identified by the relationships of the sides and the angles. So we're going to get real specific about specific types of quadrilaterals. But all four-sided figures are quadrilaterals. The sum of the angles is going to be equal to 360. Okay, a parallelogram is a quadrilateral that has two sets of equal and parallel sides. It kind of comes from the name of it. So I've drawn a picture over here. We've got a basic quadrilateral or parallelogram. Opposite sides are going to be equal. So I'm going to draw these opposite. Single dash here means they're equal. Double dash means they're equal. And these are also parallel. So I draw a little lines, arrows going the same direction to communicate that they're parallel. So the other side, I'm going to draw two arrows going the same direction to communicate that those two are parallel. So that might be one way that you would see that information communicated in a drawing. Now, something else that's true about parallelogram is that opposite angles are equal to each other. So I'm going to draw a single curve here to indicate that these opposite angles are equal. And I'll do a double curve over here between this angle, and you can see it's getting really crowded. These two angles are also equal, and that might be a way that might be communicated in a drawing. We're not going to doctor up the rest of these drawings because it's going to get really cluttered. I just wanted to show you how that is communicated. Equal dashes or tick marks to communicate equal edges, and then arrows, same number of arrows going the same direction communicates that lines are parallel. Okay, a rectangle, I think everybody's most familiar with those, is a four-sided figure. Opposite sides are both parallel and congruent, and then each of the angles are 90 degrees. So it's a parallelogram with the specific added feature of angles are 90 degrees. Okay, a square is a special type of four-sided figure in that all four sides are equal to each other, and angles are all equal to 90 degrees. Okay, a rhombus is basically kind of a square, but it's squished. And so you have all four sides being equal like a square, but we're back to our opposite angles are going to be equal to each other. They're not going to be 90 degrees. And so it's a parallelogram in that it's got opposite sides both parallel and equal as well. So things are getting a little bit messy here. When I come to a trapezoid, you can see that a trapezoid is a unique one in that it's a four-sided figure, but we only have one pair of sides that are parallel. Now this is actually an isosceles triangle because the two legs that are not parallel are actually congruent to each other. But you might have something like this, where these two are parallel to each other, but these two opposite, the legs are not. So the loosest definition for is the one with the trapezoid. It only has one pair of sides that are parallel as a four-sided figure. So we're going to move ahead and we're going to talk about finding our perimeter and our area of these different four-sided figures. So the area for a parallelogram, a rectangle, and a square are all going to follow the general format of the area is equal to base times height. But you have to remember the base and the height have to be at right angles to each other. The trapezoid is a little bit different. There's different ways that you can see this formula. Height times the sum of the bases divided by 2, or 1/2 times height times the sum of the bases. I think most students like using 0.5 for half, 0.5 times the height, and the sum of the bases. Now keep in mind this base 1 and base 2, base 1, base 2, base 1, base 2. You're not plugging into or calculating with 1 and 2 here. You are just using the base 1 in the lower right corner, the base 2 in the lower right corner here to name your bases, saying that these are two separate bases. I think that'll make a little more sense once we get going with this. Okay, to find the area and the perimeter, we're going to start out finding perimeter first. Perimeter just means you're adding up all the sides. This is a square, so you've got 4 sides. You could just say 4 times 14 to come up with 56 units. If I want to find area, I know that if this side is 14, this side is 14, and you have to use the formula base times height. They just basically have to be at right angles to each other. It's just that our legs are, both of our sides are equal to each other. So you could say 14 times 14, or 14 squared if you're going to be fancy, is equal to 196 units squared. Okay, so this one we've got a perimeter. You could go about saying, you know, opposite sides are equal to each other, so I'd know that these are both 3 and both of these are 7, and then I could just add them up, say 3 plus 7 plus 3 plus 7, or I can recognize that I have 2 of each, so I can say 2 times the sum 3 plus 7. 3 plus 7 gives me 10, and when I double that I'd end up with 20 units. If you want, you can go ahead and double check. Is 3 plus 7 plus 3 plus 7 equal to 20? It's just that was kind of a shortcut. Okay, our area again is we're using the base times the height. So, and the base and the height have to be at right angles to each other, and they are. So 3 times 7 is going to give us 21 units squared. Okay, moving on to the next one. You need to recognize that opposite sides are going to be parallel and equal to each other, so we could use that same approach here if we were working on the perimeter. You can add them all up, or you can say there's 2 of each of them, so I can put 2 outside the parentheses and say the sum of 3 plus 5, which would give us a perimeter of 16 units. Okay, and for our area, it's really important that you recognize the area is going to be equal to the base times the height. The base and the height have to be perpendicular to each other. So always remember that. It's easy to grab the 2 that are perpendicular to each other. So 4 times 3 would be equal to 12 units squared. Okay, so coming down here, this would be a rhombus. All 4 sides are equal to each other. Our opposite angles are equal to each other, but the angles are not all 40 degrees, just so you know. So we know that these 4 sides are equal to each other, so we know our perimeter is going to be equal to 4 times 7, being all 4 sides are equal to each other. So that would give us a total of 28 units. And then when I go to do my area, I have to remember I have to pick the 2 that are at right angles to each other. This is my height in here. If this is 7 here, this would be 7 here. So I have to take base times height would be, trying to draw a 5 and it's coming out of 3. 5 times 7 is going to give me 35 units squared. Okay, and this is one of those lovely trapezoids. So our perimeter is not too tough. You could just go ahead and say 3 plus 5 plus 3 plus 7 is going to give us a total of 18 units. But when we go to find our area, again, I think you're going to want to use the formula in that format with a half using 0.5 for 1/2. It's just easiest to plug that in. So when I do that, I end up with 0.5 times my height. Now my height is at right angles to my 2 bases. It's at right angles to both the top and the bottom because this is sitting on one of its bases. So the height is 2, so I'm going to put that in parentheses, and then I have to take the sum of my bases. My 2 that are parallel to each other are the bases. So 5 plus 7, and that's going to give me 12 times 2, 24, divided by 5. We end up with 12 units squared. Okay, this next one looks a little strange because it's actually a trapezoid. We have 2 sides that are parallel, but it's sitting on its height, or one of its sides, and one of its sides happens to be the height. So that makes that very unique. So my perimeter, I'm adding up all those sides to get 14 units. I go to do my area, I'm going to have to say 0.5. I have to do my height, but I have to recognize my height is the one that's at right angles to the 2 bases. It's sitting on its height, so the bases are going up. Okay, so 2 is my height, and then the sum of my bases, 4 plus 5, which would be 9. Then when I continue on doubling and then having it, this comes out to be 9 units squared.